It was at that point that Rose's petals began to change. The massive extension reaching outward and into the air, nearly 30 foot, began to shrink down as if they were being reeled in towards Rose's bud. "What's going on?" Mayrie said as she saw the petals beginning to retract. "Rose, are you doing this?" she asked. "No, I'm not doing it. I mean, I can feel it. I can see it, but I'm not doing it," she said as the petals finally shrunk back down, now about the same size as her mother's, and in short measure, they seemed to densen themselves, growing thicker, soon much more closely resembling the petals that her mother had, simply more of them, with slightly different patterning and shape. "What is that?" Rose said. "Why did they shrink?" "I don't know, Rose," her mother said, looking curiously at her petals. "I mean, they're certainly still beautiful. You're radiant, darling, you really are. You haven't lost anything. But you're not exactly normal. There are many things that could be affecting this. It could be your father's blood that gave you an alternate state to your petals. Perhaps they shift their form, dependent on what you're using them for. Or it could be the influence of the royal bloom. Perhaps that state is only temporary, something you call upon when you need it. Or perhaps it's precipitated by specific sets of circumstances. I really don't know, Rose," Mayrie said, feeling a bit confused. It was at that point that they all heard a very familiar sound. Rose's stomach growling very loudly. "Oh man, it looks like I need to eat again," Rose said. "And after all of that stuff that I ate." Just then, Rose began to hear something. As she started paying more attention, she began to notice that she could hear a great deal, hearing small creatures skittering around, frogs hopping, snakes slithering through the distant grass, crickets chirping, all of it very vivid. As she did, the call of her stomach lit out once more, growling loudly, as suddenly Rose got a feeling, like a sharp sense of something, as if she sensed something's presence. Looking quickly in that direction, finding that she was staring off into the woods. "There's something there," Rose said as she glared into the distance, suddenly feeling drawn in that direction, starting to take steps that way. Once again, she began to feel it. She now recognized part of the sensation. It was how she felt when she communed with nature in order to see things that were far away. Then she felt it again and again. Little pulsations, bursts of sense and intuition, as if she could tell the direction of specific things, feel them. There was a group of small creatures, perhaps the size of dogs, maybe wolves, only 2 or 3 of them, about a quarter mile to the east, and one very large creature, much larger than a dog or a wolf, within the same range, about a quarter mile, only southwest. Without realizing it, Rose began to lick her lips, her stomach once again beginning to growl at her. "Rose? Are you all right, Rose? Are you frightened?" her mother asked, looking at Rose, staring off into the distance. "No, I'm not frightened. Why would you ask?" she said, turning to look at her mother. "Your hands, Rose," Mayrie said, looking down towards Rose's hands. As Rose looked down herself, beginning to raise her hands, she noticed that her thorns had extended, stretched out into the long claws that she had used once before. It was at that point that Rose began to feel another new sensation. Something extending, stretching out, as four very large vines extended themselves, reaching out from the bulb just underneath the petals on her back, whipping and curling in the air around her. Vines were extremely long, somewhere around 20 feet, maybe 25. All four of them seemed to whirl around Rose. As she took note of it, trying to focus, she noted that she could control them. It felt like moving her arms or legs, like it was simply natural. She began moving them around her in different ways, as if she was stretching, getting a sense of them. She pulled one of the vines down in front of her, reaching out and grasping it with her hands. The vines seemed to have a soft texture to them, smooth. If she was to gauge the feeling, it felt something like touching the outside of a watermelon, only this had more bend to it, more give. They were quite flexible, and she could feel them in great detail. They seemed to be fairly sensitive, being able to feel even her finger slightly running across it, tingling a bit, as if she was giving herself a tickle. It was at that point that once again she felt it, that sensation, the jolt, telling her that there were animals in the woods. Her attentions kept pulling her towards the larger one, seeming to grow more and more focused with each passing second, eventually finding herself staring out in that direction, as if she was unable to avert her gaze, still with her vine in hand. As she gazed out into the woods, she felt a sharp stabbing pain in her hands. "Ow!" she said, as it drew her attention away for just a moment, looking back to the vine that she had just let go of, to find sharp thorn-like barbs, very small ones, beginning to line the outside of the long vine, extending out as her stomach growled once more. It was at that point that Rose remembered what her mother told her, that it was possible that her bloom might coincide with something that she inherited from her father, the hunter's will, that she would enter a state in which her desire to hunt would become insatiable. And at this point, there seemed to be no doubt. She was beginning to feel the effects. It was her hunger. Her hunger was calling her to hunt. "Rose? Are you still there, Rose?" her mother said, looking at her concerned. "Yeah, Mom, I'm still here. I haven't gone anywhere yet. But that thing that you told me about, the hunter's will, I think it's starting." "The hunter's what now?" Jax said as he began to approach. "Well, I didn't tell you of this because it wasn't important, but part of Rose's father's half of the family, so to speak, has a bloom of their own, a passage into adulthood in which, unlike us of the Sky Ray, who simply bloom, they enter, well, something they call the hunter's will. They are overcome with a desire to hunt, to find food and devour it. Understand that she will not become a mindless monster by any means, but it appears as though the hunter's will has begun to take effect. Rose is being called to hunt, and from what I hear from her father, the desire will only increase as time passes, and will only subside once the hunt has been completed. Rose must go now. There is no choice in the matter. She must hunt.